The Galactic Observation Corps had a saying, and I want you to really sit with this one. Never assume a species is harmless just because it looks soft. We had that saying for about 600 years before we met humans. And then, after we met humans, we had to add a second line to it, especially if it looks soft and smiles at you. My name is Vorith7, Senior Field Observer for Sector 9 Nile, and I have filed exactly 231 incident reports in my career. Most of them were boring, atmospheric anomalies, territorial disputes between minor species, one very embarrassing situation involving a Threlian diplomat and a misidentified fruit. But report number 232, that one I wrote by hand, that one I wrote slowly, carefully, with the kind of attention you give to something you need future generations to actually believe. It started on a station called Meridian Cross. Meridian Cross was one of those mid-tier transit hubs that nobody particularly loved, and everybody absolutely needed. It sat at the junction of 4 major shipping lanes, operated by a joint coalition of 7 species, and was home to approximately 40,000 permanent residents and another 15,000 transient travelers at any given time. It smelled like recycled coolant and fried protein paste. The corridors were too narrow. The lighting was always slightly too dim in the commercial sectors, which was a deliberate design choice by the Velthari contractors because their species found bright light uncomfortable, and nobody had ever successfully argued against them about it, because the Velthari held 3 of the 7 coalition seats. It was not, in any meaningful sense, a dangerous station. It had a security force. It had protocols. It had Commander Yusuf Adewale, a human, incidentally, which I noted in my initial survey with mild professional interest and absolutely no premonition whatsoever, who had run station security for 11 years and was widely regarded as competent, methodical, and deeply, profoundly boring, in the way that only truly effective administrators can be. The human population on Meridian Cross was small. Humans had only been full coalition members for about 30 years at that point, and their presence in deep transit stations was still more novelty than norm. There were perhaps 200 of them on the station. They worked in trade, in engineering, in the medical bay, in the food stalls. They were, by all observable metrics, the least remarkable contingent on the station. The Threlian ambassadorial staff alone generated more incident reports per month than all 200 humans combined. I was there on an entirely routine survey assignment, cataloging interspecies commerce patterns. Riveting stuff. I had a small office on the administrative level, a research assistant named Pelu who was young and enthusiastic in the way that made me feel very, very old, and absolutely no expectation that anything interesting was going to happen. Then Mira Osei arrived. She came in on a standard passenger transport, logged under an independent contractor classification, listed occupation as logistics consultant, which is the sort of description that means absolutely everything or absolutely nothing, depending entirely on context. She was unremarkable on paper. Human female, mid-30s by their biological clock. No registered affiliations, clean travel record, valid credentials across 14 coalition ports. Pelu flagged her arrival in my daily digest, and I spent approximately 3 seconds reading her file before moving on. She was, by every available measure, completely ordinary. She had one of those faces that people describe as open, easy to look at, easy to forget. She wore practical clothing. She carried a standard-issue transit bag. She checked into a mid-tier residential berth on level 7, went to a food stall in the commercial sector, ate something that smelled aggressively like fermented grain products, a human specialty I had never understood the appeal of, and then walked to the engineering quarter to meet with a Velthari parts supplier named Osek Dual about a cargo routing contract. Normal. Completely, absolutely, aggressively normal. I know this because I reviewed the security footage later. Obsessively. Multiple times. Looking for the moment, the single frame, where I should have known there was none. That was the thing. That was the part that kept me up at night for about 6 standard months after I filed my report. There was no tell. No flicker of something else behind those eyes, no subtle wrongness in her posture or her movements. She was just a person, going about her day, smiling at a Velthari parts dealer and negotiating a 15% reduction on bulk coolant couplings. The Drav arrived 4 days later. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the Drav, and I genuinely envy you that innocence, let me paint you a picture. The Drav are large, not large in the impressive decorative way of the Orwellian heavy-worlders, who are big and round and actually rather pleasant once you get past the initial visual impact. The Drav are large in the way that seems specifically designed to make every other species feel like an architectural afterthought. They average about 3 meters in height, with a body plan that one of my colleagues once described as what you would get if a predator decided to become a predator more seriously. 4 limbs, all of which terminate in gripping appendages capable of exerting approximately 800 kilograms of force per square unit. Armored subdermal plating, a sensory cluster that could track thermal signatures through 2 centimeters of standard hull paneling. They were also, technically, coalition members. Junior members. Probationary, really. Which was a diplomatic classification that roughly translated to, "We are allowing you here because refusing you seemed worse, but we are watching you very carefully." There were 6 of them. They had arrived on a registered commercial vessel under the auspices of a trade negotiation with the Meridian Cross Coalition Board. They had the correct documentation. They had a liaison officer, a Drav named Gorveth who spoke passable coalition standard, and had the specific kind of smile that species develop when they know their smile frightens other species and have decided to use it anyway. Commander Aduwale met them at the docking ring personally. I watched the feed from my office. He was professional, courteous, completely unruffled. 11 years of running a multi-species transit hub will apparently do that to a person, and he escorted them to their assigned commercial suite with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by anything. The trouble did not start immediately. It rarely does with the Drav. They have a patience that I find genuinely unsettling, because patience in an apex predator is not a virtue. It is a hunting strategy. It started on the 3rd day of their visit. It started in a corridor on level 4, the residential transition zone, mid-afternoon by station clock, moderate foot traffic. I have the timestamp. I have reviewed this footage so many times that I could probably reconstruct it frame by frame from memory, which is not something I particularly wanted to be able to do, and yet here we are. Mira Osei was walking back from the commercial sector. She had a small bag of what the food vendor records indicate were roasted seed products, another human dietary habit I will never personally investigate, and she was moving at a completely unhurried pace, the way people walk when they have nowhere urgent to be and are mildly content about it. Gorveth was coming from the opposite direction. Now, the Drav do not experience crowded corridors the way smaller species do. When a Drav moves through a corridor that other species also occupy, the other species typically make certain adjustments, quickly, without being asked. It is a natural response to the sensory reality of a 3-meter armored predator moving toward you at a confident clip, and every species that had ever encountered the Drav had independently arrived at the same behavioral conclusion. Move aside, do not make eye contact, and be grateful when it passes. Mira Osei did not move aside. I want to be very precise here, because I have thought about this moment with the kind of analytical intensity that borders on the unhealthy. She did not fail to notice Gorveth. She did not misread the situation. The footage is clear. She saw him coming. She registered him. Her head came up. Her stride adjusted incrementally, a tiny recalibration. And then she straightened, and she continued walking at exactly the same pace, on exactly the same line, holding the bag of roasted seeds at her side. Gorveth stopped. He had never, in the entire sensor-reviewed record of his movements on Meridian Cross, stopped for anything. He stopped for Mira Osei. And then, this is the part, he stepped to the side. A small movement, barely half a meter, but he stepped to the side, and she walked past him without breaking stride, and the entire interaction lasted approximately 4 seconds, and produced what I can only describe as a profound atmospheric shift in that corridor, that 3 separate alien bystanders apparently felt viscerally enough to file stress reports with the station medical bay afterward. I flagged it. I sent Pel-U a note that said, essentially, review this, tell me what you see. And Pel-U came back 40 minutes later looking like he had been asked to explain something that the laws of physics had personally assured him should not be possible. She didn't flinch, he said. No, I said. The Drav stepped aside. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Should we be concerned? I looked at the frozen frame on my display. Mira Osei mid-stride, completely relaxed, roasted seeds in hand, the retreating bulk of Gorveth just visible at the corridor edge. And I thought about the 600-year-old core saying, and the addendum about soft species that smile at you. I think, I said carefully, that we should be paying closer attention. We started paying closer attention the next morning. By that evening, I genuinely wished we had started paying closer attention to something else entirely. The Drav had a meeting scheduled with the Coalition Board on day 4. A formal trade negotiation, properly structured, witnessed the works. What the Coalition Board did not know, what we discovered when Pel-U, displaying a level of investigative initiative I had not previously credited him with, pulled the encrypted sub-channel traffic from the Drav vessel, was that the trade negotiation was not a trade negotiation. It was an assessment. The Drav had been cataloging the station's defensive infrastructure, security response times, population distribution, and exit choke points for 3 days. They were meticulous about it. Professional, even. Gorveth's report to their vessel, which Pel-U translated with increasingly alarmed facial expressions, described Meridian Cross as viable for controlled acquisition and recommended proceeding to Phase 2 upon conclusion of the formal session. Phase 2, for anyone unfamiliar with Drav territorial expansion doctrine, and again I envy you, involved a rapid, coordinated action designed to establish a physical presence that would be politically complicated to remove, not an invasion in the classical sense, more of a fait accompli, move in fast, secure the critical nodes, make removing you more trouble than accepting you. They had done it to 3 smaller installations in the outer sectors over the past decade, and each time the coalition had debated, deliberated, drafted strongly worded statements, and ultimately accepted the new reality. I was composing an emergency signal to Core Headquarters when my comm unit lit up with an alert from station security. There was an incident on Level 4. The security feed from Level 4 loaded on my display in fragments. The station's internal network was already showing strain, which told me something had happened to the relay nodes, which told me something had happened to the relay nodes deliberately, which told me the Drav had moved faster than even their own encrypted timeline had suggested. Pel-U was standing behind my chair making a sound I had not previously heard him make. A sort of sustained, low-frequency distress noise, like a small atmospheric compressor losing pressure. I told him to stop. He did not stop. The feed stabilized. Level 4. The same corridor, same midsection, was no longer mid-afternoon quiet. 3 of the 6 Drav were visible in the frame, and they were no longer performing the social theater of visiting trade delegates. The armored subdermal plating that their species could voluntarily elevate for threat display was fully raised. They were moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that does not come from improvisation. It comes from rehearsal. They had rehearsed this on a station with 40,000 residents and a security force that had been specifically designed for interspecies dispute mediation, not for responding to 3-meter armored predators executing a practiced acquisition protocol. Commander Adewale's voice came through the station-wide address system approximately 90 seconds after my alert landed. Calm, unhurried. The voice of a man who had, in 11 years, developed a pathological resistance to audible panic. He announced a station security advisory, requested that all residents shelter in designated safe areas, and indicated that security personnel were responding to an incident on Level 4. He did not say what the incident was. He did not need to. 40,000 station residents who had been living alongside Drav delegates for 4 days had already arrived at their own conclusions, and the sound of that collective conclusion A kind of building, reverberating unease moving through the station's residential levels like a pressure wave, was audible even on the administrative floor. I tried to raise a duelli directly. His channel was occupied. I tried the coalition board liaison. No answer. I tried the Drav vessel. Yes, I tried the Drav vessel, because sometimes in a crisis you do things that seem rational in the moment and deeply inexplicable in retrospect. And got a hold signal, and what I was fairly certain was the sound of someone on the other end of the line finding my attempt very amusing. Then Palu said, "Observer Vorath, look at Feed 7. Feed 7 was a secondary corridor camera, one level below the main incident, covering a maintenance access route that ran parallel to the Level 4 central passage. It was not a camera that typically produced interesting footage. It covered a gray corridor with gray walls and gray conduit piping, and the occasional gray maintenance worker going about their gray maintenance tasks, and I had reviewed approximately 0 seconds of its historical output in my entire assignment on Meridian Cross. Mira Osei was in Feed 7. She was moving fast, not running, not quite, but the particular rapid walk of someone who has a destination and has decided that the social convention of appearing unhurried no longer applies to the current situation. She was alone. She had no equipment that I could see, no weapon, no toolkit, nothing but the same practical clothing she had been wearing since she arrived on the station. She was heading toward the maintenance junction that connected to the Level 4 central corridor, and her face was the part that made Pel-O's atmospheric compressor noise start up again. And honestly, I could not fault him for it. There is a word in the Threllian emotional taxonomy. Threllians have a much more granular emotional vocabulary than most species. They find it professionally necessary. The word is verith soul, and it translates approximately as the specific calm of a predator that has already decided the outcome. It is not anger. It is not aggression. It is something quieter and considerably more final than either of those things. Threllian scholars use it almost exclusively in historical contexts, when describing the moments before significant violence. That was Mira Osei's face in Feed 7. She reached the maintenance junction. She paused for exactly 2 seconds. I have the timestamp. And then she did something that Pelu and I watched in complete silence, and that I subsequently described in my report using 6 full paragraphs, because I could not find a way to make it shorter and still have it be accurate. She rolled her shoulders back, a small movement. The kind of physical adjustment a species makes when it is about to engage in significant physical effort. And then something changed in the way she occupied space. I do not have better language for this than that. Something changed. The dimensions of the corridor did not change. The lighting did not change. Mira Osei did not visibly change. Same height, same build, same face. But the Feed 7 corridor, which had always looked like a gray maintenance corridor of moderate width, suddenly looked narrow. It looked narrow the way corridors look narrow when something large is moving through them, and the thing moving through it was still a medium-height human woman in practical clothing. And I have reviewed that footage many times, and I still cannot fully explain what my visual processing was responding to. She went through the junction door. Feed 7 lost her. I switched to the Level 4 secondary feeds. The 3 Drav had reached the central hub intersection, the critical node, per their own reconnaissance report, from which the station's life support management systems could be physically accessed. Gorveth was with them, all 4 together, which meant the remaining 2 were elsewhere on the station, presumably securing the secondary choke points their assessment had identified. They were operating on a timetable. They were confident in the timetable. Every behavioral indicator I had in my training said they had done this before. They knew how it went, and nothing on a mid-tier transit station with a human security commander and a core observer writing logistics reports was going to materially alter the projected outcome. Mira Osei came through the access door at the north end of the hub intersection. Gorveth saw her first. I could tell because he stopped moving, the same small, involuntary stop from the corridor 3 days ago, the one that had made 3 bystanders file stress reports, and the 2 Drav flanking him registered his hesitation and turned to identify the cause of it. She was standing in the intersection, approximately 12 meters from the four of them, and she was looking at Gorveth with the specific expression that I had seen in feed 7 and was now watching in a much higher resolution feed. And it was not better at higher resolution. I want to be clear about that. Gorveth said something. The feed audio quality in the hub intersection was good. I have the transcript, he said. In Coalition Standard, small form. This area is under Drav administrative authority as of this station cycle. Return to your residential level. Mira Osei said, no, one word. She said it the way you say a word when the word is not a refusal so much as a statement of physical fact. The way you might say, that surface is hot, or that structure is unstable. Not a challenge, not a defiance, just an accurate description of reality as it currently existed and would continue to exist. The Drav flanking Gorveth raised their threat display. Full elevation. The armored plating spreading along their upper body architecture like a threat made structural. It was, by every xenobehavioral metric I had ever studied, the Drav signal for we are no longer performing negotiation, we are now performing something else. Mira Osei moved. I have watched the feed 219 times as of the writing of this report. I am going to tell you what I observed, and I want to be precise, because precision is what I have available to me in the absence of any theoretical framework that satisfactorily explains what I saw. She was fast in a way that did not look like human fast. I had reviewed human physical performance data before my assignment. Humans were, by coalition standards, a mid-range physical species, stronger than their apparent mass suggested, better pain tolerance than almost any species their size, but not exceptional by the metrics we used. Nothing in the data suggested what the feed showed me. The first Drav went down in 4 seconds. Not down as in retreated, down as in on the floor of the hub intersection, with Mira Osei already moving, already past him, having found, I still do not understand this mechanically, having found the specific intersection of armored plating and unprotected joint tissue that the Drav subdermal architecture left exposed when fully elevated, which was information that was not in any public coalition database, which was information that the Drav themselves had considered effectively classified because it had taken other species several costly encounters just to confirm that such a vulnerability existed, let alone locate it. She knew where it was. The second Drav was faster to react, and it nearly mattered. There was a moment, 3 seconds, perhaps 4, where the feed showed something that Pel-O later described as approximately the most frightening thing I have ever seen, and I agreed with him. And what made it frightening was not the violence, it was the silence. She did not shout. She did not communicate anything. She was completely, utterly quiet, with that face, and the second Drav went down beside the first. Gorveth did not run. I will give him that. Whatever else I think about the Drav and their rather casual approach to other species' sovereignty, Gorveth did not run. He stood his ground and he raised his own threat display to full elevation, and he was, by every objective measure, a significantly more dangerous physical entity than the human woman standing across the hub intersection from him. He also, clearly and visibly and in high-resolution feed footage, did not want to be there anymore. She walked toward him. He held position for 6 steps. Then he took 1 step back, then another, and then the third step back became a retreat, and Gorveth, the Drav delegate, the lead operative of a species that had successfully acquired 3 installations through confidence and physical presence, and the reliable prediction that smaller species would accommodate them because the alternative was unpleasant, turned and moved toward the nearest exit at a pace that I would technically classify as rapid. Commander Aduwole's security team arrived in the hub intersection 40 seconds later. They found 2 incapacitated Drav, one very still Mira Osei standing with her hands loose at her sides, and a corridor to the east where Gorveth had been. The remaining 2 Drav, at the secondary choke points, surrendered to station security within the next 8 minutes. Word travels. I have a note in my file from Corps Headquarters, responding to Report 232, that reads, Observer Voreth 7. Your account has been reviewed and flagged for the Xenobehavioral Division. Please be advised that the subject individual and her organization have existing arrangements with the Coalition that fall outside standard observer jurisdiction. No further action is required from your office. Consider this matter closed. Her organization. I pulled every public record I could access on Mira Osei after that note arrived. Logistics consultant. Clean travel record. Valid credentials across 14 Coalition ports. Born in a mid-sized city on the North American continent of the human homeworld. No registered affiliations. And then, because Pelu was still young and enthusiastic and apparently had contacts I did not know about, he found something, a reference, indirect, buried in a Coalition intelligence digest 3 years old, to a human organization that had no formal name in Coalition records, only a descriptor that some translator had rendered into standard as the Quiet Ones, and a notation that read, species, human, status, not hostile to Coalition interests. Operational parameters, unclear. Recommend non-interference. Recommend non-interference. I thought about Gorveth stepping aside in a corridor. I thought about the corridor in Feed 7 looking suddenly narrow. I thought about 600 years of observational doctrine and the saying we added after we met humans. And I wrote a third line, if a Quiet One tells you something is not happening here, believe it and be grateful. Mira Osei checked out of her Level 7 residential berth 14 hours after the hub intersection. She settled her account. She collected her transit bag. She went to the same food stall and got another portion of roasted seeds. She walked to the docking ring, boarded a transport heading to the outer sectors, and was gone. I watched her leave on the docking feed. She looked completely, absolutely, aggressively ordinary. She looked like a logistics consultant who had spent 6 unremarkable days on a mid-tier transit station and was heading home with nothing particularly interesting to report. I filed report 232. I used 6 paragraphs to describe 12 seconds of footage. I recommended the 3 additional lines to the core doctrine archive. They approved all 3. The Drav, for what it is worth, have not attempted another installation acquisition in the 4 years since Meridian Cross. Coalition analysts attribute this to the political fallout from the failed operation. I have a different theory. I think Gorveth went home and told someone what it felt like to step aside for a human in a corridor, and what it felt like to retreat from one in a hub intersection. And I think that somewhere in the Drav strategic calculus, a new variable got entered. The variable labeled, what else are they not telling us about themselves? Smart variable. Honestly? Best thing the Drav have ever done, in my professional opinion. I do not know how many Mira Oseis there are. I do not know what the Quiet Ones actually are, what they do, or who sends them where. I have never received another note from Core Headquarters about them. I suspect this is intentional. What I know is this. Meridian Cross is still a mid-tier transit hub that nobody particularly loves and everybody needs. It still smells like recycled coolant and protein paste. The Velthari still control 3 coalition seats and the lighting is still too dim. Commander Aduwale is still there, still methodical, still profoundly boring in the way of the genuinely effective, and occasionally, according to Pel U, who stayed on assignment there, and sends me updates with the enthusiasm of someone who has not yet learned to be appropriately cautious about what he pays attention to. Occasionally, a human comes through on a logistics contract. Ordinary-looking, unremarkable, smiling pleasantly at customs, eating things from food stalls, conducting completely normal business in the commercial sector, and every single time, without exception, the Drav delegation that cycles through Meridian Cross on their quarterly compliance visits gives that human a very wide berth in the corridors, every single time. I find this both professionally fascinating and deeply, genuinely comforting, which is not a combination I anticipated when I accepted a routine survey assignment on a station that smelled like coolant. But that is the thing about humans, I have come to understand. You never quite anticipate them. That is, I suspect, precisely the point.